After decades of peace, Europe is on the brink of war. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is happening thousands of miles away from the closest major Indian city. And yet, millions of Indian families will feel the economic consequences. That's because the world economy and financial markets are interconnected. As COVID demonstrated, events on one side of the planet can set off shockwaves on the other side. This conflict already looks like the most serious conflict in Europe since World War II. Russian forces carried out airstrikes, captured army bases, and they are now attacking the capital city Kiev. And this city may fall at any time. That's the story of the war. But there is another side to it, a side called economics. That's what we are going to discuss in today's episode. First, we will understand how the world will be affected, and then India. So watch the video till the end. To really understand how the conflict of Russia and Ukraine will affect the world, we have to first understand how important is Russia to the world and especially for Europe. Today, Russia is the second largest crude oil producer in the world. Crude oil is the raw material from which petrol, diesel and other petroleum products are produced. 11% of the world's crude oil supply comes from Russia. China is the largest importer of oil from Russia, but they are a friendly nation with Russia, so it may not impact them much. About half of Russia's exported oil, roughly 2.5 million barrels per day, is shipped to European countries including Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, Finland, Lithuania, Greece, Romania and Bulgaria. Russia is also the second largest producer of natural gas, which again exported to European countries I already mentioned. This natural gas is sent over a network of pipelines which go through Ukraine. Any damage to these pipelines due to war can disrupt the supply. But before we go deep into the topic, we have to understand what sanctions are.
Economic sanctions against Russia are starting to have an impact.
The European Union has also now decided to ban the Russian state media outlets.
Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia.
Today, we live in a globalized society where every country is dependent on other. India is dependent on China for electronics and America is dependent on India for its software exports. Every country exports something they are really good at and imports something that is scarce. After World War II, every country understood that going for a war is a bad idea. You lose people and you need to spend a lot of money. Instead of going for a physical war, sanctions can be used, where a country stops its economic relations with other country. For example, tomorrow Germany may say to Russia that I no longer want to buy oil from you. Russia is an oil exporting country, and if a major oil importer like Germany is not buying it, it will impact oil industry in Russia. Oil companies will make losses and it may lead to unemployment. This is just an example. Sanctions can be levied in different ways. Sanctions can be levied on a country, person or a company. After Russia attacked Ukraine, the first thing every major economy did was to impose sanctions. For example, US imposed sanctions by freezing the Russian bank accounts in US. Russian companies are prohibited from raising money from US market, and other countries imposed similar sanctions. Sanctions are bad for Russia. It will isolate the country from the world and its economy will slow down. Russia is already experiencing that. Its economy is not growing, especially after 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea, a region in Ukraine, and other countries imposed sanctions. But this time, Russia is better prepared than most other countries to deal with sanctions. Russia has been running on enormous current account surplus, which means Russia is exporting more than imports. This surplus brings in more dollars for Russia. And Russia has a record foreign exchange reserves of $630 billion, sufficient to cover nearly 2 years of imports. Now, to support the war effort, Russia will divert all its resources like oil, gas, and money towards war in Ukraine. And one country is highly dependent on Russia for fuel and natural gas, and that is Germany. Germany is the biggest buyer of Russian gas. Russia provides 55% of the Germany's gas requirements. This means any supply cut from Russian side will hit Germany hard, and this explains why Germany is not so active in the conflict like US or UK. Europe is likely to be the most affected region, partly because the greater dependence on Russian energy supplies, but also because of the geographical proximity to the war. These fears led to panic and stock markets crashed. Crude oil prices in the international market crossed $100 per barrel for the first time since 2014. This is very important. Only 3 times in the history it happened that crude oil prices crossed $100 per barrel. At the same time, European natural gas prices jumped as much as 62%. In a report, the investment bank JP Morgan warned that oil prices could easily jump to $120 per barrel And in unlikely scenario, if Russian oil exports are stopped, crude oil prices could hit $150 per barrel. That would be the most devastating scenario. This rising crude oil prices will impact our daily lives. You see, fuel is a very important commodity. It makes transport possible. From vegetables to luxury car, everything is dependent on fuel. And once the price of this fuel starts to increase, it leads to inflation, where prices will increase continuously. It will increase the cost of our daily needs, and in turn, it will increase the cost of living, which we are already experiencing due to COVID-19. You see, in the last 2 years, crude oil prices were trading between $70 to $80. And during the same time, fuel prices in India skyrocketed. Petrol crossed 100 rupees and diesel crossed 90 rupees. Now, when crude oil prices in the international market already crossed $110 per barrel, and if it sustained for a long time, we can only imagine where the fuel prices in India will go, and inflation will be inevitable. High inflation is not good for any country. It weakens the economy and people will reduce their spending to make up for the increased prices. And to control the inflation, central banks will have no option but to raise the interest rates. So you can expect your loans to get costlier. Beyond energy, other commodities could experience price volatility. Russia is a major producer of metals, including aluminum and palladium. Russia is also the biggest exporter of wheat, while Ukraine is a significant exporter of both wheat and corn. Although the Russian stock market has fallen significantly since the start of the invasion, the sanctions imposed by other countries are unlikely to have an immediate effect. Sanctions rarely do. They are simply not the economic equivalents of the bomb that Russia is currently dropping on Ukraine. The risk of inflation holds true for India as well. Russia has always been a friend of India. India's trade linkages with Russia and Ukraine are not as large as other nations. If you rank all the countries based on how much we export, Russia comes in the 32nd position. And if you rank them by how much we import, Russia is in 20th position. Ukraine ranks even lower. India's share of exports to Russia as a percentage of total exports is 0.8% only, while India's imports from Russia constitutes just 1.5% of its total imports. The top item of India's imports from Russia is crude oil, followed by coal and petroleum products. Of the total crude oil we import, only 2.3% of it comes from Russia. But don't think that India is somehow protected from risk due to lower imports, because it doesn't matter how much you import. Finally, you are going to buy the crude oil from the international market and the price has already crossed $100 per barrel. There are also concerns over the shipment of sunflower oil. Ukraine exports more than 350,000 tons of sunflower oil to India. India imports over 70% of the edible oil from foreign countries. Half of the sunflower oil used in India comes from Ukraine. If harvesting and processing is affected in Ukraine due to war or exports are blocked, it will lead to supply shortages in India and prices will go up. It will have a bad effect on the supply of sunflower oil. In India, with severe threats of supply disruptions, companies will be left with no option but to hiking prices. Expect rise in the price of sunflower oil. Not just that, if sunflower oil becomes scarce or becomes costly, people may turn to other cooking oils, and which will in turn lead to rise in prices for them as well. Automobile sector is expected to be the hardest hit by the war. Rise in oil prices and continued shortage of semiconductors and chips, which are very much important in the manufacturing of a car. Besides that, Ukraine is also home to many companies which manufacture car components for the automakers. As per a report in the Wall Street Journal, Lionel AG, a company which supplies wire systems to the automobile companies, has shut its factories, and due to which a Volkswagen factory in Germany had to be shut down. You can see the butterfly effect. You see, India is also dependent on Russia for defense equipment and weapons. In fact, Russia is the second largest weapon exporter in the world, and India is its largest customer. Between the year 2000 and 2020, 65.5% of all the weapons of Indian Army are imported from Russia. Also, there are many pending contracts where Russia is yet to deliver. For example, the prestigious S-400 defense system. Now, due to the sanctions, Russia won't be able to deliver them on time. Whatever predictions we discussed so far are under the assumption that Russia and Ukraine conflict will continue for a relatively longer period, which I wish and hope should not happen. But Putin is not ready to back down and Ukraine is fiercely resisting. For Putin, invasion of Ukraine is a prestigious issue, one that will give him more popularity in Russia, and it will act as one more step towards restoring the glory of Soviet Union. But finally, no one wins the war. Everyone loses something. The loss of lives, economic impact and destruction only makes common man's life harder. Already, the world is going through its worst phase due to COVID-19 crisis, and now this conflict. Maybe this is the dark side of globalization. but we don't have any option either. All we can do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So that's the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If yes, hit that like button and help this video to reach as many people as possible and share this with your friends. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.